Shalom, shalom, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Pulse of Israel in our eternal and biblical homeland, the land of Israel, in our beautiful, biblical, and indivisible capital, Jerusalem, since King David's time. Today, I'm joined by Josh Hammer, of the host of the Josh Hammer Show, senior editor at large of Newsweek, and the author of Israel and Civilization. Shalom, shalom, Josh. Thank you so much for joining the show today.
Avi, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I reached out to you because I recently watched the debate that Charlie Kirk hosted at a Turning Point event between you and Dave Smith. And the first thing that really got to me, and I've seen and heard Dave Smith before, so it's not no big shocker. But in this hour and a half, 2 hour debate that you had with him, the amount of information that he seems to know and comes off as credible with regards to American politics, foreign policy, Israel. He makes it sound like he knows what he's talking about, but in essence, if someone does not know, he's just cherry picking and things totally out of context and making the story sound much, much worse and totally wrong. And I can only imagine how hard it is to have a debate where you need hours to just be able to explain properly all the different factual information that he's putting out there. So, would you like to address that to get going?
Sure. So there's a lot to unpack there. So yes, people like Dave Smith, people like Daryl Cooper, this literal neo-Nazi who Tucker Carlson has now hosted multiple times on the show. People like Dave Smith and Tucker and excuse me, Daryl Cooper. They have this very, it's talented in kind of a satanical, diabolical sense. They have this very talented way where they can present in glib fashion this kind of mixture, this amalgamation of some obvious facts with some deeply tangentious speculation, some anecdotal cherry picking there, and they present it in a way that, as you say correctly, if you don't really know the facts yourself, it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to disentangle it there, and it's really, really dangerous. That presents an extraordinary challenge to someone who is asked to debate Dave Smith, and I've now debated Dave Smith twice. Because if you want to just spend the entire time saying that he got this wrong and trying to fact check him, frankly, one, I would be interrupting not just every sentence, but multiple times every sentence. Two, I would have to spend the entire time of my segment of the debate just correcting what he said as opposed to making my points. Neither of these is sustainable. That's just not the way that a debate can possibly go. And frankly, if I attempted to do that, I would just totally lose because I would be playing defense the entire time instead of trying to advance my positive argumentation and try to present my points in accordance with my substance and worldview and all of that. Now, the first time I debated Smith back in February, it was at Princeton University in New Jersey. It was part of a Steamboat Institute Campus Liberty Tour debate series at that time. I went in with a very different strategy. I happen to know this conflict, this issue very well. As you mentioned, I wrote a book on it, Israel and Civilization. I'm also a lawyer by background, so I know the facts, the history, the law. I know most of what there is to know on this particular topic. So that was basically my approach back in February at Princeton, was to kind of just go in there. And there was one exchange that kind of had me really rethink my strategy for this rematch, which was there was an exchange where Smith was casually accusing, as he often does, Israel of committing quote unquote genocide in Gaza since October 7th. Now, I know a thing or two about the legal definition of genocide. So I started quoting the Geneva Conventions and an article this, and here's why it's not genocide. I started quoting civilian to combatant death ratios on a historical basis and this and that. And I finish my spiel, and Smith essentially looks back at me back in February and just says, "But look at the rubble." And like, various people in the audience just started clapping like seals. So, what that kind of drilled home to me was that, frankly, even at a place necessarily like Princeton, which last I checked is the number one ranked university in the country virtually every year in the U.S. News and World Report rankings, what that whole kind of experience kind of taught me is that, contrary to what my longtime friend Ben Shapiro said 10 years ago when he was kind of really kind of becoming famous, his tagline back then was "Facts don't care about your feelings." But the challenge of our day and our era is that no longer seems to apply. In fact, sometimes something approximating the opposite happens to be the case, where it sometimes seems like feelings don't really care about your facts. And that's a very difficult situation to be in, especially for someone like me who is kind of fact, history, logic, law, et cetera, oriented. But with all that having said, and being in this particular venue at Turning Point USA, which to Charlie's great credit has become a truly formidable organization, a deeply kind of pro-Trump, pro-MAGA organization, let's call it there. I decided that this was the proper venue, especially with Charlie himself as the moderator of the debate, to really kind of take a sledgehammer to Dave Smith in very kind of emotionally charged fashion, and to really start driving home my number one point, which became my leitmotif throughout the debate, which was to emphasize his point that whatever Dave Smith and the Tucker Carlsons of the world may say, this is not quote unquote MAGA or quote unquote America first, as President Trump himself understands it. So that was kind of my adjustment and strategy from our rendezvous back in February until the debate at the Turning Point Conference this July. I think people can watch and decide for themselves whether or not it was successful. But if nothing else, Avi, I left that debate feeling confident that I had achieved my number one goal, which again was to persuade this young impressionable audience, both watching in person and on the live stream at home, that whatever these guys may or may not say, they're entitled to their own opinions, but this is not MAGA as the movement itself and the leader of the movement, President Trump himself, understands it.
Yeah, and I think we're both in agreement in understanding that the foreign policy direction coming out of the Tucker Carlsons, the Dave Smiths, the Candace Owens, and more voices within the conservative, some people call the woke right, and we can definitely call it the Jew-hating anti-Semitic right. It's all leads to the weakening of America. Israel is the front line of the freedom-loving world, the strongest and really only true ally America can rely upon in the Middle East, and they're cutting they're cutting the tree out from beneath them, in terms of a future of a prosperous and secure America by throwing us under out, out throwing us under the bus. But I want to continue because the bigger issue is, again, I've gone to Turning Point events in America a number of times, witnessing the growth of this Jew-hating anti-Israel sentiment within the conservative right. Very, very worrying. And here I'm watching this debate, and Dave Smith's getting applause for blatant lies and like literally blood libelous accusations against Israel, against Netanyahu, against the AIPAC lobby. And I'm also watching the comments on the YouTube video. And again, Charlie Kirk, I imagine most of the people watching the debate are followers of Charlie Kirk or Turning Point. And the vast amount of comments that are totally anti-Semitic, anti-Israel. I saw a video the other day of someone else that I'm sure you know personally, Michael Knowles, talking about an incident that took place here in Israel. It made headline news in America. Even Lindsey Graham calling Israel out for settlers' violence against the church that never happened. It was an absolute lie, but yet it was spread all over the Christian conservative right in America. And again, this is a Daily Wire, works with Ben Shapiro. Knowles himself says, I'm pretty supportive of Israel. And yet the comments, again, 99% of all the comments of his viewership, totally anti-Israel and the Jew hatred, anti-Semitic. Where do you think things are going? And are you as worried as I am about what we're witnessing within this potential break within the conservative right, even Republican Party in America?
All right, there's a lot of names tossed out here and a lot of things, so it's a daunting task to try to answer all that in one answer, but I will give it my best shot. So, look, I mean, every individual is only his or her own individual, right? So we can only kind of take it on a case in, case out basis. I've known Michael Knowles for a long time. I actually used to be colleagues with Michael Knowles back when we both worked at the Daily Wire. Michael is definitely personally not an anti-Israel guy. I'm fairly certain his wife is actually Jewish, for whatever that may or may not be worth. And he's actually been very supportive of Israel throughout the war. Now, Michael is also a devout Catholic. And, I don't think I'll be breaking any news when I say that sometimes a lot of Catholics tend to follow the lead of the Pope. Not always, but that's a pretty common thing when it comes to Catholicism for the past 2,000 years or so. This new Pope, the first American born Pope, has been blowing this particular incident you're talking about beyond out of proportion there. So it's not, I don't think it's exactly shocking that Michael would say that sort of thing. On the specific point about these comments on YouTube, and trust me, I saw it myself when I subjected myself to 2 hours of torture, otherwise known as Tucker Carlson interviewing Daryl Cooper last week about Jeffrey Epstein. The comments were just pure bile. I mean, oftentimes stuff out of a Daily Stormer, Der Stürmer, things like that. I mean, just really disgusting stuff. There is some anecdotal reason for believing, and I don't have data to support this, but a lot of people in my orbit tend to think that a lot of these comment sections on social media in general, certainly on X, but also sometimes on YouTube, are sometimes foreign bot funded operations, and then that it's not entirely organic. Again, I don't claim to have the receipts to be able to prove that there, but this is a common speculation that I hear. I did hear from others who are watching the Rumble live stream of my debate against Dave Smith that many, if perhaps even most of the comments were actually pro me and anti Smith during that Rumble live stream. You're right that Smith did get some very loud applause in that audience there. Smith is a libertarian, and libertarians tend to have small but deeply passionate and extraordinarily vocal supporters. So, Smith's intellectual hero is the former Texas Congressman Ron Paul. He loves to think of himself as kind of a Ron Paul acolyte, maybe with like half the IQ, but, neither here nor there for present purposes. But Ron Paul, many years ago, when he was still in the thick of politics and was running for president seemingly every 4 years, he would win the CPAC straw poll virtually every year at the big conservative conference in DC known as CPAC. I've spoken to CPAC, 4, 5, 6 times, whatever it's been. So Ron Paul would always win the straw poll at CPAC because, again, libertarians are small, but they're really, really, really vocal, and they love to make themselves heard. And sometimes, at times, they're disproportionately influential among the sort of folks who attend these conferences. Now, having said that, having been there on that debate stage with Smith and Charlie Kirk, Smith had his applause lines. I certainly had my applause lines too. By the way, if I'm not mistaken, I got booed 0 times. Smith was booed quite loudly twice. Once during my opening remarks, once for an extraordinarily foolish and utterly stupid and asinine thing that he himself said. So, he was booed twice. I was not booed either time. And, Charlie did tweet out this past Friday the results of a 2,000 person Turning Point USA survey. They essentially gave it a survey to 2,000 attendees of the conference. I think that was a sample size, if I'm not mistaken. There was a series of questions there. 73% of them describe themselves as pro-Israel. That's admittedly not 90%, where perhaps it would have been a decade ago, but 73% is still a very healthy majority. Probably even more tellingly, we spent a lot of time on that stage debating Iran and President Trump's decision to send in the B-2 bombers on Fordo, Natanz, and the other nuclear facilities. 86% of the Turning Point USA attendees supported President Trump's strikes on Iran. 86%. So, whatever applause Dave Smith is getting when it comes to the Iran issue, whatever applause Tucker Carlson is getting, I mean, there are some people who agree with that, but it is a serious, serious minority of the Republican Party, of self-described MAGA Republicans, and frankly, even of Turning Point USA conference attendees. So, look, there is a lot happening on the American right, and it's a mixed bag for sure at this particular time. I think it's worth emphasizing that the current administration, the Trump administration, which is the definitive epitome of MAGA, like literally MAGA operationalized, President Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, this is by far the most pro-Jewish, philo-Semitic administration in the history of the United States. I mean, even holding aside the foreign policy debate for now, holding aside the fact that Netanyahu has visited the White House 3 times in 6 months, which, I mean, literally, I don't know if that's ever happened, ever. I mean, I'm not even sure like Margaret Thatcher or Winston Churchill ever got that kind of treatment at the height of their respective conflicts. Holding that aside, holding aside Trump's involvement in the war in Iran, and albeit in limited fashion. I mean, just what the administration is doing on domestic level when it comes to combating anti-Semitism on American universities, they're trying to prosecute anti-Semites. I mean, they've really just gone above and beyond in every which way there. So, there is a lot of good data points. There are definitely some troubling data points as well, and we can kind of unpack that a little bit more if you want to. But I am not necessarily planning to flee the country or anything like that tomorrow out of fear for my life, especially given the fact that I live in Florida, which is like one of the greatest places to be a Jew here in Ron DeSantis, Florida. I mean, Jewish life here is utterly incredible, frankly. So, I mean, that's doubly true for me. But I tend to be a little less black-pilled, call it, than some of my friends. But there are definitely some troubling warning signs, and I think about this pretty much every day. So I'm definitely attuned to it, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, the way I basically talk about it and explain it to people is we're never going to get I think, a more solid domestic and foreign policy administration in the United States of America ever. And it's not about bad things happening during the next 2 years of the Trump administration. It's about what's to come after the Trump administration, what's going to be the future constellation of the Republican Party. And obviously, if the Democrats come back to power, well, we're all in deep trouble. But a final issue to talk to you about. I mean, I know here in Israel, we're very, very on top of raising the warning flag of Qatari influence in DC, which also has influence in the Trump administration. I don't remember which paper, or maybe it was the Wall Street Journal that pushed out the Qatari plan to finance 250 conservative influencers in order to have more influence in DC. PR firms, think tanks. Is that something that you're worried about, or that you're seeing also, that also could potentially be pushing some of the growth in terms of the anti-Semitic and anti-messages coming out from various conservative voices and influencers?
I definitely do think that this is part of it. I don't think that this is all of it. But look, there was an investigative report from the Washington Examiner, the conservative DC-based newspaper. This came out, I don't know, maybe a month and a half ago, around the time of Shavuot, give or take. And this report demonstrated that there was this kind of sketchy, small consulting LLC, this husband and wife operation in Northern Virginia. I'm blanking on the exact name. It's kind of obscure in the weeds. And on their FARA, their Foreign Agent Registration Act, formal paperwork with the government, they had one client listed, which was the embassy of Qatar. I think they were getting paid $180,000 a month or something utterly insane from the Qatari embassy. And if you look on the FARA paperwork, they listed at least one service that they did, this consulting group, on behalf of the Qatari embassy, which was to arrange an interview between the Sheikh Al Thani and guess who, Tucker Carlson.
Right.
So yes, there are some dots to be connected here, certainly. I don't think Qatar is the only problematic actor. I frankly suspect that some of these bot operations on social media are, if I had to guess, are probably just coming actually from Iran itself. But Qatar is the more sophisticated actor. Qatar has the money. They're the number one investor in American higher education for the past 25 years, literally number one foreign investor, which is astonishing. It's not China, Russia, UK, France, Germany, anyone other than this tiny, tiny country of Qatar, which is so, yes, I mean, that definitely has an effect, especially coming out of universities that are known to have deeply close Qatari ties. Some of these universities now even have campuses in Doha. Georgetown University is a good example, Northwestern University there. But there is definitely a there was definitely a broader shift as well happening. I mean, you kind of mentioned the Democrats. I mean, the American left is has changed a lot, to put it mildly, when it comes to Middle East related issues. My friend Harry Enton on CNN was just doing a segment on this 2, 3 weeks ago or so, showing that the Democratic Party, as recently, I think it was like 5 or 6 years ago, was still they still favored Israel over the Palestinian Arabs by give or take a 10 to 20% margin, something like that. The most recent poll now shows that Democrats support the Palestinian Arabs over Israel by an over 40-point margin. So
Wow.
that is a veritable sea change in a very short period of time. This is all happening in the post-Obama era, by the way. Barack Obama totally started this trend in many ways, but it is deeply, deeply accelerated with the rise of modern wokeism and Black Lives Matter and the Hamas and just all the various kind of parts of the intersectional woke brain rot that are really kind of now taking root on the left. And not everything that's happening on the right is necessarily kind of a foreign Qatari operation either. I think that's kind of sloppy thinking. I mean, there are some dots to be connected. I mentioned that FARA registration form in Tucker Carlson, no doubt about that. But there definitely is a rising strand of anti-Israel sentiment. And at times, although it is not a majority or anywhere remotely close to a view, of outright anti-Semitism. And again, it's something that I'm deeply on guard of. I think though, kind of getting back to the Turning Point conference here, here's my general impression based on what I saw at Turning Point, because Turning Point really is kind of the nexus of the movement, really kind of the belly of the beast, right? So these are young activists. This is a student action summit conference. My general impression, based on the conversations that I had and having talked with Turning Point staff, I'm friends with Charlie. We talk a lot. I mean, my general impression of the Turning Point activists, including in a venue like that in Tampa a couple weeks ago, that these are young, passionate conservatives, often not entirely, but oftentimes sincerely religious Christians, the overwhelming majority of whom do indeed have some sort of intrinsic love or appreciation of the Holy Land, of the land of Israel, of the Jewish people, of the Jewish religion, and so forth there. What they're struggling with is that these are young folks who have grown up in the milieu and the context of just being told from all sides and all politicians about what an utter disaster American foreign policy has been around the world, especially in the context of the Middle East. And
Which
frankly,
is
they're not wrong.
true.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. That's exactly right. It is true. Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan. These are a bunch of boondoggles.
Right.
So that is why the challenge for someone like me is to go into a setting like that and to make the case for U.S.'s relations in a way that is different from the moralistic, you can call it whatever you want, neoconservative, liberal, humanitarian, various mentalities that led to these failed interventions. By the way, I do this explicitly in chapter 7 of my book, Israel and Civilization, which is entirely dedicated to making this argument for repudiating kind of those failed regime change wars that have really scarred these young people while still making a robust kind of Trumpian pro-Israel case there. So there's work to be done, but it's a winnable fight because again, this is not irreconcilable. You can simultaneously hate these failed wars while still be as robust a supporter of U.S.'s relations as possible. Indeed, that is my stance, and frankly, that's President Trump's stance too.
Yeah, and again, as someone who watched the debate, if anyone who didn't, I highly suggest watching it. You did a very good job of getting that point across, which will bring me up to my final point, which as someone, I guess it touches me more because I'm in Israel and I've been very vocal about this. I don't know how vocal you have been, but in terms of the Syrian situation, southern Syria and the literal ethnic cleansing of the Druze, which follows the ethnic cleansing of the Alawites, literal ethnic cleansing. And there's absolute, maybe not absolute, but from here it looks like total silence from media in America, definitely from these conservative voices that bash Israel. Here, Israel is the only country in the world trying to save an ethnicity from virtual being cleansed, ethnic cleansing, genocide, even without American support, because America's trying to stop us from saving the Jews. It seems like the Jews are being sacrificed on some bigger diplomatic plan out of Washington, which is personally very sad to see. This is something that worries me. And again, I go back to the debates, and like that isn't even. Again, this is before this. The debate is before this actually happened, but it just so clearly shows anyone with eyes, if they know the information, Israel is the only moral force on the ground that obviously we don't want to fight. We're only forced to fight because we have to fight in order to save ourselves and as well as save other minorities. And yet to watch these debates when we're the ones being accused of the worst things when the truth is 180 degrees. I guess I ask, throwing back the question to you of this whole context of Syria and the virtual ethnic cleansing of Jews and no attention whatsoever, and then the actual hypocrisy in what the reporting is being done regarding Israel. And even I bring in Michael Knowles of throwing us under the bus in that video about what happened, which didn't even happen, but yet Christians are also being killed, and yet there's absolute silence from the whole Christian right regarding that. Again, I'm throwing things out there, but love to hear your feedback on
All right,
context within the
sure.
American ecosystem.
Okay, two things I think to unpack here. One is Syria is a horrible situation. Obviously, it's profoundly disturbing. Unfortunately, it's also tragically predictable. When Bashar al-Assad was toppled back in December, and Bashar al-Assad was a world historical evil man with a death toll to his name that would have made few but the worst of the 20th century tyrants blush. Yeah, look, I mean, that was a massive strategic loss, a geopolitical loss for Iran and for Russia. And overall, it probably was a net improvement, but it was far, far, far from the tremendous victory for freedom and liberty and hope and truth and all these good stuff that a lot of folks on both the right and the left were making it out to be. Because again, this is an Islamist regime. This is a Turkish Erdogan puppet regime. I mean, the guy Al Shara, Al Jalani, whatever he's calling himself these days, he literally has a career as a peripatetic jihadist, as someone who was kind of floated from various Al Qaeda offshoots there. So the fact that they would then kind of effectively coax or cajole their Islamist militias into committing unspeakable atrocities against various ethnic minorities, the Druze, the Christians. I mean, this is the kind of thing that I was already thinking about within hours of hearing about what happened to Assad back in December. So it's completely predictable. And this is one of the reasons why I, and I think many others, were pretty skeptical, actually, of President Trump's really kind of generous outreach to this guy in Damascus. Now, again, if he's actually willing to reform himself, then great. But I have not really seen a whole lot of evidence of that yet. There's a couple of data points there. We'll see. We'll see how it plays out. But horrible situation. Now, you're right that I saw Eli David, who runs a very popular account on X. I saw him tweet the other day, at least at that time, I haven't checked since then, that Pope Leo had tweeted 7 times about the accidental shrapnel hitting this church in Gaza, which is obviously a sad thing. And I'm not going to pretend like that's not a sad thing. It's obviously a sad thing and terrible, but accidents happen in war. He had tweeted 7 times about that and zero times about the utter butchery that is happening in Syria, again, including to Christians, including to Greek Orthodox Christians, Catholics, and so forth. So there is an extraordinary double standard, and there are a lot of people who are looking to exploit this double standard to achieve what I think that their real aim is here. And I genuinely think that this is actually the aim of Tucker Carlson and people like Tucker Carlson, is to drive a wedge, not just between the United States and Israel, but to actually drive a wedge between the original people of the book, the Jewish people, and the great Gentile offshoot, the Christians. And part of this does require trying to rehabilitate certain strands of Christian theology. It's no accident that Tucker Carlson just a few months ago had on his show, I guess we can call him a Christian theologian. That seems a little generous, but someone who is a former co-author of a book with a guy named Andrew Torba, a literal neo-Nazi, the founder of a website called Gab, someone who says the most disgusting things imaginable. So his co-author, I'm blanking on his name, but he's like a quote unquote amateur theologian. So he goes on Tucker Carlson's show and is kind of giving the whole replacement theology thing. It will not shock you to know this guy has very dim, bordering disgusting thoughts on the Jewish people and the Jewish state. So this is all part of an extended information operation. This is all part of, I think, a very deliberate effort to create distance, not just between the U.S. and Israel, but between the United States, or between the Jewish people and Christians. Again, this is not a majority viewpoint, but these strands are all coming together here, and this blood libel, like what happened in Samaria recently. No, there were not Jewish quote unquote settlers, a word I hate, by the way, not, but they were not Jewish quote unquote settlers, torching a church there. None of that happened, frankly. And now even Mike Huckabee, who was fanning those flames, has kind of done a 180 and rescinded what he said. But it's all coming from a tangentious, deeply cynical effort to disentangle Jews and Christians. Why, you might ask? I don't necessarily have a great answer to that, frankly, but it's dark stuff, and it's something that I'm trying to combat on a daily basis, however little I can.
Well, thank you for everything you're doing, Josh. Can you give a plug for your book before we end?
Sure. So thanks for having me, Avi. I appreciate it. So my book is called Israel and Civilization: The Fate of the Jewish Nation and the Destiny of the West. Available everywhere books are sold: Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, all the above and more.
Amazing. Josh, again, thank you so much for coming on the Pulse of Israel today. Keep up the amazing work you're doing, and looking forward to seeing you on your next trip in Israel.
Thank you. God bless you, Avi.
God bless you too, Josh. If you are not yet a subscriber to our daily, belief-based, inspiring, politically incorrect, truthful videos about Israel, the Jewish people, and the freedom-loving world, What are you waiting for? Go to pulsevisual.com and click to subscribe today. And yes, we are a donor-based operation. We need your donations for support in order to make these videos and get our videos seen and do all the work we do. So every once in a while, whether a large donation or a small donation, just go to pulsevisual.com and click on the donate button. Shalom, everyone, and thanks for watching.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.